December 1865. The Civil War is over. The 13th Amendment is ratified. The historic law that officially abolished slavery in the United States. 4 million black Americans are no longer property. They are free. But here is the mystery. If black people were freed in 1865, why did it take 5 more years for them to get the right to vote? And why did they have to wait another 100 years of blood and struggle to actually use that right? This is Today Before History Podcast. Today, we are telling the story of the century-long struggle for Black Americans to win their place at the ballot box. We have to go back to December 1865, when the 13th Amendment was ratified, the historic law that officially abolished slavery in the United States. To understand that year, you have to understand a terrifying paradox. The shackles were legally broken, but the hands were still empty. Formerly enslaved people had no land, no money, and no education. But most importantly, they had no political shield. The South was in ruins, and the former ruling class was asking a single question: how do we keep control without the word slavery? The answer was a set of laws called the Black Codes. These codes were designed to recreate slavery in all but name. In states like Mississippi and South Carolina, if a black man didn't have a written labor contract, he was arrested for vagrancy. His punishment? He was leased out to work on a plantation. It was called Convict Leasing, and it was a brutal loophole that proved one thing: freedom without power is just a different kind of trap. Lawmakers in Washington quickly realized that the 13th Amendment, which only ended slavery, wasn't enough. The South was simply legislating people back into servitude. This led to the 14th Amendment in 1868. This was the bridge. It granted citizenship to everyone born in the U.S. and promised equal protection under the law. But even this wasn't the final answer. You can have citizenship, but if you can't vote for the people who make the laws, you are still a subject, not a citizen. This realization that the ballot was the only thing that could protect the 13th and 14th Amendments is what finally led to the 15th Amendment in 1870. For a brief, shining moment, it actually worked. Between 1870 and 1877, the South saw a political revolution that seems almost unbelievable today. Protected by federal troops, black men didn't just vote, they led. Over 2,000 black men held public office. This wasn't just local positions. We're talking about Hiram Revels, who became the first black U.S. senator. He literally sat in the seat formerly held by Jefferson Davis, the man who led the Confederacy. For 7 years, America saw what a truly multiracial democracy looked like. But as history often shows us, progress is frequently met with a violent counter-reaction. In 1877, the federal government made a deal. They withdrew the troops from the South. The golden age of Reconstruction ended overnight. Southern states couldn't technically delete the 15th Amendment. It was part of the Constitution. So they decided to suffocate it. They invented literacy tests. These weren't tests of reading. They were traps. Registrars would ask black applicants to interpret the most obscure parts of the state constitution, or ask impossible questions like, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap? Then came the poll taxes, fees that poor sharecroppers simply couldn't pay, and if the law didn't stop you, the KKK would. By the 1890s, the results were devastating. In Mississippi, there were 130,000 registered black voters in 1867. By 1892, that number was slashed to less than 9,000. The 15th Amendment was still there, but for nearly a century, it was a ghost. This brings us to 1965 and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. People often think King was asking for new rights, but his strategy was much more profound. He was demanding the enforcement of a promise made 100 years earlier. King's genius was in creating a visual crisis. In Selma, Alabama, when the world saw peaceful marchers being beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday, they weren't seeing a protest for a new law. They were seeing the violent denial of a constitutional right that had existed since 1870. King forced the federal government to stop being a bystander. His work led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This law finally gave the 15th Amendment teeth. It banned literacy tests and sent federal overseers to the South to ensure that the right to vote actually meant the ability to vote. So, what is the lesson of those 5 years between 1865 and 1870, and the 100 years that followed? It's that democracy is not a state of being. It is a constant, active defense. The 15th Amendment was a magnificent promise, but without access and enforcement, it was just ink on parchment. History isn't just a list of dates, it's a warning. It tells us that rights aren't something you get once, they are something you have to win over and over again. Because, as we've seen, the distance between the law and the reality of the people is often measured in generations. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Today Before. If you found this story important, share it, because history is only useful if we remember it.